Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss whether or not Red Wall Tory MPs actually understand why they won their seats and what they needed to do, if it were even possible, to retain them. A recent article which presents the views of one of them, the notable ape, Jonathan Gullis, suggests that they may actually be completely clueless. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this is one of those videos I occasionally do where I'm bemoaning the lack of any credibility amongst Tory MPs. It can apply to MPs of any party really, but the Tories are the ones in control. I mean, I don't mind Tory MPs being clueless if they use their magnificent ignorance to lose elections, but it offends me when the party machine and the client media can engineer success for these monkeys. You know, I keep saying, I understand calculating evil. That makes sense to me. I cannot get over stupid evil. Stupid evil shouldn't win. I was reading an editorial piece in the Financial Times which described the pessimism surrounding Red Wall Tory MPs who feel that their time is coming to an end, which I'll get onto, but also of Jonathan Gullis being more optimistic. Now, in itself, that doesn't necessarily represent a disconnect from reality on either part. You know, there are some Red Wall seats that the Tories had a realistic shot of retaining, and actually with one or two, it's still far from certain that Labour will win them all back. What's important to be mindful is why each of those 48 or so-called Red Wall seats were won by the Tories. As far as I'm concerned, there are 5 factors to be mindful of, but 4 of which helps the Tories. I'm not going to discuss the other one. The other one's the Brexit party. And some of these factors that helps them were one-offs, and seats reliant on those factors were very unlikely to be retained. You know, the win was a one-off, just like the factors. But some of the factors were not one-offs, which gave the Tories a chance in some of them. So the first factor was natural demographic changes. Like many of the Red Wall seats are in former industrial powerhouses in the north of England and North Midlands mostly. You know, these were communities where many of the active voters are old enough to remember when times were a lot better, when there was a lot more money flowing into the community. But their memory's a little bit shaky. They forget that it was the Tories who took it all away. But the consequence was that in a town with fewer opportunities, young people who are these days much more likely to go to university, they move elsewhere for jobs after graduation. You know, this leaves behind a larger proportion of the population being non-graduate workers or elderly homeowners. In other words, the sorts of people who tend to vote Conservative. And this had nothing to do with recent political turmoil. This was down to a demographic change that was slowly moving that way over a great many years. All of the Red Wall seats benefited from this shift to an extent and will continue to help them in the next election and beyond. But how likely it was to believe a Red Wall seat could be retained depended largely on just how large a factor this was in the 2019 result. The second factor was the Jeremy Corbyn aspect. Like, put simply, Boris Johnson wasn't popular in the country. Yes, you could find his fans, but his approval rating as a potential Prime Minister, or he was a Prime Minister at the time, was negative. People didn't consider him to be honest or even competent. But such was the negative view of Jeremy Corbyn amongst the public that Johnson was seen at worst as the lesser of two evils. As the 2019 general election came out, Tories could have retained some hope that this factor would still benefit them. It was possible. You know, even given that Corbyn stepped down, his replacement could have been a puppet from his camp. You know, and then they could have said that this person was just acting as like the face of Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, so important a factor was this to the Tories in the 2019 election, Tory strategists haven't given up on it. You know, how often have we heard both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak try to link Starmer to Corbyn as a way of desperately continuing to play this card? But it simply can't work. It was always an act of desperation when they played it. A last resort when their back was against the wall in PMQs and they couldn't think of anything else. This factor is now a dead duck for the next election. Any votes won due to this factor are basically gone. The third factor was, of course, Brexit. Big one. This is another factor that is pretty much a dead end, dead and buried for the Tories, desperately trying to cling to it. I know from activists that Labour are satisfied that Red Wall voters think that Brexit is done. It's no longer considered an electoral issue. The Tories still try to claim that, oh yeah, you've got to vote Tory, otherwise Labour will reverse Brexit. Now, for what it's worth, yeah, they will. Because they have to. Because they have to. But it won't be done as the Tories claim. It's not going to be quick. We know they're not going to get into power and go, right, we're going to negotiate re-entry back. We know none of that's happening. And what's more important, voters, even the few but strategically important Brexit supporting voters, they don't believe that's going to happen either. But the Red Wall Tories were all defined by Brexit. You know, I don't know how many Red Wall Tory MPs really believe in Brexit, but it is what they're all about as a political entity. They have to be. They had to be. That campaign, for which they were an inexperienced election candidate, was all about Boris Johnson Brexit. It was plastered all over their campaign literature. That's what they were selling. Boris Johnson and Brexit. Boris Johnson and Brexit. That's what they campaigned with. Both are considered done and dusted by the electorate now. So those MPs, still inexperienced, need to find something else to define them in the next election, because neither is going to help them next time. The fourth factor was what they thought was their trump card, levelling up. Boris Johnson was going to get Brexit done. He was going to see off Jeremy Corbyn. He was going to thank the people in the Red Wall for lending the Tories their votes, as indeed he did. He said, I recognise that you have just lent us your votes. I am now going to justify that choice with levelling up. And that meant, they said, closing the gap between the affluent parts of the south of England and the left behind communities basically everywhere else. Only any of those Tory MPs in the Red Wall who believed it don't seem to understand what the Tories are all about. The best they could hope for was that some funding would be announced for some grand projects in their area, maybe a year or so away from the next election, and the hope that voters would be fooled into thinking, oh, the money's coming. Oh, we're going to get this grand project. Brilliant. Budget's been allocated. Oh, yeah, we'll vote for you again to see it through. Don't you worry, son. But this was a nonsense. It's not just that the Tories aren't interested in redistributing wealth or opportunities. It's that their core support in those affluent areas are dead against it. You know, people vote for various parties for various reasons, of course. But the main thing that defines the Conservative Party compared to all the other main British parties is that the Tories are unashamedly selfish. You know, the greed is good mantra is something they think is fine. They make the claim that a vote for them is a vote to do what's best for you at the expense of others. Long-standing Tory voters in the Shires didn't want to pay higher taxes in order to boost investment somewhere else. And they sort of understood the mathematics here. One of two things is going to happen. If you try and level up parts of the North Midlands and the north of England and North Wales, wherever, it means one of two things. Either you're going to have to pump more money in, which means they pay higher taxes, or you're going to have to take investment from where they are and transplant it, which means they have fewer opportunities. They don't want that. They don't want more opportunities in other places. They like being in the areas that acts like a magnet to all the investment money, because it boosts their own employment opportunities, boosts their own incomes, boosts the value of their house, especially when the Tories clamped down on the building of affordable housing. You know, relying on homeowners for your vote is a bit of a problem for any party who wants to do what's best for the country. Fortunately, the Tories don't, so it's fine. But what it meant was that there was zero chance of levelling up the Red Wall areas. Zero chance. Wasn't even a case that the Tories would fund investment to the parts of the north that returned a Tory MP, which would have been an illegal allocation of funds, but they don't worry about things like that. There was actually no chance of levelling up policies being realised. And sure enough, as soon as they published their definitive plans, their actual plans, not just their vision, projects in the north were massively scaled back or cut altogether. Whoever would have guessed it? And any Red Wall Tory MP who ever thought the policy was going to see the light of day, to me, just exposed themselves as being pig ignorant about politics in this country. Indeed, in this article I was reading, it said that Gullis felt that if Sunak could just provide an inspiring vision of the future, then the fortunes of the Red Wall could turn back to the Tories. Now, he's not asking his government to deliver anything real, just present a vision. And I just thought, mate, Sunak's been PM for 2 months. Johnson was PM for 3 years. He never provided that vision. But this is the disconnect of some of these Tory MPs. See, they lionised Boris Johnson because he won them their seats. But they seem oblivious to the fact he didn't do it for them. He didn't do it for the party. He didn't even do it for the people. He did whatever was necessary for himself. And as for this vision, they're for oppositions. It's the picture you paint of the country you could have if only they were in power. Well, the Tories have been in power for over 12 years now. If this vision still isn't ready after 12 and a half years, it could just be argued that maybe they don't really know what it is. I mean, in 2019, I actually thought most of the Red Wall Tory MPs would just see it as a bit of an experience, a few years. I mean, some of the seats were winnable, of course, some of the seats, absolutely, and still remain winnable, but most of them were never going to survive this one-off perfect storm of events that just conspired with the Tories in 2019. I thought that maybe some would try, make a name for themselves, and then pop up in a safe seat somewhere else in the country a few years later, but the rest would just enjoy a few years of being an MP, then go back to whatever they were doing beforehand. But the way many of them are carrying on, whether it's the pessimistic ones, it's saying, well, why are you pessimistic? Weren't you expecting this? Did you actually think you would win your seat next time? Or if it's the optimistic ones like Gullis, who think that their chances rest on Rishi Sunak doing this or that, to make it all better, you just think, do you know nothing about politics? Do you know nothing about your own political party? Stupid evil annoys me every time. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.